Hare Krishna, everyone. Hare Krishna, everyone. We're reading from chapter 5, text 1. Arjuna Uvacha Sannyasam Karmanam Krishna Punaryogam Cha Samsasi Yachreya Etayorekam Tanme Bruhi Sunishitam.
Hare Krishna, Chapter 5, Karma Yoga, Action in Krishna Consciousness. Text 1. Arjuna said, O Krishna, first of all, you asked me to renounce work, and then again, you recommend work with devotion. Now, will you kindly tell me definitely which of the two is more beneficial?
Text 2. Sri Bhagavan Uvacha Sannyasaha Karma Yogascha Nishreya Sakaravupo Tayostu Karma Sannyasat Karma Yogo Vishishyate.
Text 2. The personality of Godhead replied, the renunciation of work and work in devotion are both good for liberation. But of the two, work in devotional service is better than renunciation of work.
Text 3. Neyaha sa nitya sannyasi yo na dveshi na kankshati nirdvandvo imahabaho sukham bandhat pramuchate.
Text 3. One who neither hates nor desires the fruits of his activities is known to be always renounced. Such a person, free from all such a person, free from all dualities, easily overcomes material bondage and is completely liberated, O mighty armed Arjuna.
Text 4. Sankhya yogo prathak palaha pravadanti na panditaha ekam apyasitham sitah samyak ubhayor vindate phalam.
Text 4. Only the ignorant speak of devotional service, Karma Yoga, as being different from the analytical study of the material world, Sankhya. Those who are actually learned say that he who applies himself well to one of these paths achieves the results of both.
Text 5. Yatha sankhya prapyate sthanam. Apologies. Yatha sankhya prapyate sthanam tad yoger api gamyate ekam sankyam cha yogam cha yah pashyati sa pashyati.
Text 5. One who knows that the position reached by means of analytical study can also be attained by devotional service, and who therefore sees analytical study and devotional service to be on the same level, sees things as they are.
Text 6. Sanyasastu mahabaho dukkham dukkham aptum ayogataha yoga yukto munir brahma nachirenadhigacchati.
Text 6. Merely renouncing all activities, yet not engaging in the devotional service of the Lord, cannot make one happy. But a thoughtful person engaged in devotional service can achieve the supreme without delay.
Text 7. Yoga yukto vishuddhatma vijitatma jitendriyaha sarvabhutatma bhutatma kurvannapi na lipyate.
Text 7. One who works in devotion, who is a pure soul, and who controls his mind and senses, is dear to everyone, and everyone is dear to him. Though always working, such a man is never entangled.
Text 8 and 9 together. Naiva kinshit karomiti yukto manyet tattvavid pashyan shrunvan sprushajikran asnan gachan swapari swasan pralapan visrujan krudhan unmisan nimisan अपि इन्द्रियाणीन्द्रियार्थेषु वर्तन्त इति धारयन्.
Texts 8 and 9. A person in the divine consciousness, although engaged in seeing, hearing, touching, smelling, eating, moving about, sleeping, and breathing, always knows within himself that he actually does nothing at all. Because while speaking, evacuating, receiving, or opening or closing his eyes, he always knows that only the material senses are engaged with the objects and that he is aloof from them.
Text 10. ब्रह्मण्याधाय कर्माणि सङ्गं त्यक्त्वा करोति यः लिप्यते न स पापेन पद्मपत्रम् इवाम्बसा.
Text 10. One who performs his duty without attachment, surrendering the results unto the Supreme Lord, is unaffected by sinful action, as the lotus leaf is untouched by water.
Text 11. कायेन मनसा बुद्ध्या कैवलेरिन्द्रियैरपि योगिनः कर्म कुर्वन्ति सङ्गं त्यक्त्वात्मशुद्धये.
Text 11. The yogis, abandoning attachment, act with body, mind, intelligence, and even with the senses only for the purpose of purification.
Text 12. युक्तः कर्मफलं त्यक्त्वा शान्तिमाप्नोति नैष्ठिकीम् अयुक्तः कामकारेण फले सक्तो निबध्यते.
Text 12. The steadily devoted soul attains unadulterated peace because he offers the result of all activities to me. Whereas a person who is not in union with the divine, who is greedy for the fruits of his labor, becomes entangled.
Text 13. सर्वकर्माणि मनसा सन्न्यस्याते सुखं वशी नवद्वारे पुरे देहि नैव कुर्वन्न कारयन्.
Text 13. When the embodied living being controls his nature and mentally renounces all actions, he resides happily in the city of nine gates, the material body, neither working nor causing work to be done.
न कर्तृत्वं न कर्माणि लोकस्य सृजति प्रभुः न कर्मफलसंयोगं स्वभावस्तु प्रवर्तते.
Text 14. The embodied spirit, master of the city of his body, does not create, does not does not create activities, nor does he induce people to act, nor does he create the fruits of action. All this is enacted by the modes of material nature.
न दत्ते कस्यचित् पापं न चैव सुकृतं विभुः अज्ञानेम् आवृतं ज्ञानं तेन मुह्यन्ति जन्तवः.
Text 15. Nor does the Supreme Lord assume anyone's sinful or pious activities. Embodied beings, however, are bewildered because of the ignorance which covers the real knowledge.
ज्ञानेन तु तदज्ञानं येषां नाशीतम् आत्मनः तेषाम् आदित्यवज्ञानं प्रकाशयति तत्परम्.
Text 16. When, however, one is enlightened with the knowledge by which nascence is destroyed, then his knowledge reveals everything as the sun lights up everything in the daytime.
तद्बुद्ध्ययत्तदात्मानं मनस्तत्निष्ठास्तत्परायणः गच्छन्त्य गच्छन्त्य अपुनरवृत्तं ज्ञान निर्धुधा कल्मषः.
Text 17. When one's intelligence, mind, faith, and refuge are all fixed in the Supreme, then one becomes fully cleansed of misgivings through complete knowledge and thus proceeds straight on the path of liberation.
विद्याविनयसम्पन्ने ब्राह्मणे कविहस्तिति शुनि चैव श्वपाके च पंडिताः समदर्शिनः.
Text 18. The humble sages, by virtue of true knowledge, see with equal vision a learned and gentle Brahmana, a cow, an elephant, a dog, and a dog eater, outcast.
इहैव तैर्जितः सर्गो येषां साम्ये स्थितं मनः निर्दोषं हि समं ब्रह्म तस्मात् ब्रह्मणि ते स्थितः.
Text 19. Those whose minds are established in sameness and equanimity have already conquered the conditions of birth and death. They are flawless like Brahman, and thus they are already situated in Brahman.
न प्रहृष्येत् प्रियं प्राप्य नो द्विजेत् प्राप्य च प्रियं धीरबुद्धिर्सम्मूढो ब्रह्मविद् ब्रह्मणि स्थितः.
Text 20. A person who neither rejoices upon achieving something pleasant nor laments upon obtaining something unpleasant, who is self intelligent, who is unbewildered, and who knows the signs of God is already situated in transcendence.
ग्राम्यस्पर्शे श्वसत्कामा विन्दत्यात्मनि यत्सुखं स ब्रह्मयोगयुक्तात्मा सुखम् अक्षयम् अश्नुते.
Text 21. Such a liberated person is not attracted to material sense pleasure, but is always in trance, enjoying the pleasure within. In this way, the self realized person enjoys unlimited happiness, for he concentrates on the Supreme.
ये हि संस्पर्शजा भोगा दुःखयोनय एव ते आद्यन्तवन्तः कौन्तेय न तेषु रमते बुधः.
Text 22. An intelligent person does not take part in the source of misery, which are due to contact with the material senses. O son of Kunti, such pleasures have a beginning and an end, and so the wise man does not delight in them.
शक्नोति हैव यः सोढुं प्राक्शरीरविमोक्षणात् कामक्रोधोद्भवं वेगं स युक्तः सुखी नरः.
Text 23. Before giving up this present body, if one is able to tolerate the urges of the material senses and check the force of desire and anger, he is well situated and is happy in this world.
योऽन्तः सुखोऽन्तरारामस्तथा तथान्तर्ज्योतिरेव यः स योगी ब्रह्मनिर्वाणं ब्रह्मभूतोऽधिगच्छति.
Text 24. One whose happiness is within, who is active and rejoices within, and whose aim is inward, is actually the perfect mystic. He is liberated in the Supreme, and ultimately he attains the Supreme.
लभन्ते ब्रह्मनिर्वाणं श्रुश्रय क्षीणकल्मषः छिन्नद्वैधायतात्मानः सर्वभूतहिते रताः.
Text 25. Those who are beyond the dualities that arise from doubts, whose minds are engaged within, who are always busy working for the welfare of all living beings, and who are free from all sins, achieve liberation in the Supreme.
कामक्रोधविमुक्तानां यतीनां यतचेतसाम् अभितो ब्रह्मनिर्वाणं वर्तते विदितात्मनाम्.
Text 26. Those who are free from anger and all material desires, who are self realized, self disciplined, and constantly endeavoring for perfection, are assured of liberation in the Supreme in the very near future.
स्पर्शान् कृत्वा बहिर्बाह्यं चक्षुष्वैवान्तरे भ्रुवोः प्राणापानो समो कृत्वा नासाभ्यन्तरचीर्णो यतेन्द्रियमनोबुद्धिः मुनि मोक्षपरायणः विगतेच्छाभयो क्रोधो यः यः सः सदा मुक्त एव सः.
Text 27 and 28. Shutting out all external sense objects, keeping the eyes and vision concentrated between the two eyebrows, suspending the inward and outward breaths within the nostrils, and thus controlling the mind, senses, and intelligence. The transcendentalist, aiming at liberation, becomes free from desire, fear, and anger. One who is always in this state is certainly liberated.
भोक्तारं यज्ञतपसां सर्वलोकमहेश्वरं सरुदं सर्वभूतानां ज्ञात्वा मां शान्तिमृच्छति.
Text 29. A person in full consciousness of me, knowing me to be the ultimate beneficiary of all sacrifices and austerities, the supreme lord of all planets and demigods, and the benefactor and well-wisher of all living entities, attains peace from the pangs of material miseries. Hare
Hare Krishna. Thank you so much for this opportunity and apologies if I have made any mistakes. Hari Bol.
Thank you, everyone, for patiently listening to us. And my apologies. Please forgive me about for any
Hare
mistakes.
Krishna. Thank you very much, Mataji, Shubhda Mataji and Mamta Mataji, for your beautiful recitations. There was absolutely no mistakes at all. Thank you for your kindness.
Thank you, Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna. So today we'll be reading text number 24 from chapter 5 of Bhagavad Gita. Yo antah sukho antar aramas tathantar jyotir evayah sayogi brahma nirvanam brahma bhuto adhigacchati. Yo antah sukho antar aramas tathantar jyotir evachya sayogi brahma nirvanam brahma bhuto adhigacchati. Yo antah sukho antararam तथांतर ज्योतिरेव यः स योगी ब्रह्म निर्वाणं ब्रह्म भूतो अधिगच्छति. यः, one who, antah sukha, happy from within, antah aramah, actively enjoying within, tatha, as well as antah jyotihi, aiming within, ev, certainly, yah, anyone, sah, he, yogi, a mystic, Brahma Nirvanam, liberation in the Supreme, Brahma Bhuta, being self-realized, Adhigachati, attains. Translation by Srila Prabhupada is Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. One whose happiness is within, who is active and rejoices within, and whose aim is inward, is actually the perfect mystic. He is liberated in the Supreme, and ultimately he attains the Supreme. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. Unless one is able to relish happiness from within, how can one retire from the external engagements meant for deriving superficial happiness? A liberated person enjoys happiness by factual experience. He can therefore sit silently at any place and enjoy activities of life from within. Such a liberated person no longer desires external material happiness. This state is called Brahma Bhuta, attaining which one is assured of going back to Godhead, back to home. Om Jnanam Timirindasya Jnananjanashalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Sapadantikam. Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Utapad Kamalam Shri Gurum Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Shri Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhanvitam Star He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Deenabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Shri Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Suto Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Bhayevacha Patitanam Pavnebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shrivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So I welcome all the devotees assembled here today for this discourse on text number 24th of Srimad Bhagavad Gita. So, this chapter is entitled as Karma Yoga Action in Krishna Consciousness. And as the chapter title states, Krishna is now talking about renunciation of a very different kind. In this particular renunciation, one doesn't have to renounce the activities. One has to continue to perform his activities, but one has to renounce his attachment to the fruits of the activities. And stage by stage, Krishna is talking through to Arjun how one attains a different level of happiness within, and one is able to therefore not depend upon the objects of the senses for his happiness. And this particular text is in that context where Krishna is saying that one who's happy within, they don't need not be looking outwardly for happiness. They are self-satisfied, and in the purport, Srila Prabhupada has used the word Brahma Bhuta, which kind of reminds me of that verse Brahma Bhuta Prasannatma na sochati na kankshati Samay Sarveshu Bhuteshu Madhbhakte Lavate Param. One who is in self-realized stage, Brahma Bhuta, is always staying happy, prasanna atma. Na sochati na kankshati. Why is he prasanna? Why is he happy? Because neither is hankering for something that he wants to achieve in the future, nor he's lamenting for something that he has lost in the past. So, factually, he's not living in these two dimensions of time at all. Neither his mind travels to the future, nor his mind travels to the past. So, where does he stay? He stays in the present. The anxieties of this world lives in the future. The factual situation that one person is facing is not the cause of anxiety, because that moment that person is living his life and everything is okay. But it is the future when I will not have that security, when I will not have that facility, when I will not have what I aspire for, when I will not have those relationships with me. All of that is building a lot of anxiety. And anxiety in the old ages, when will I leave this body? That's a big anxiety. God knows what kind of disease I'll get in the future. So the future is always producing unlimited anxieties as much as unlimited desires. So the person who is self-realized, who is happily rejoicing within, does not really get in the stage of kankshati. He has no anxiety. Neither he has lamentations because he lives in the present. So when that present goes in the past, that past does not come back in the present. Present remains present. There is nothing in the past. because this person has already won over his attachment with the objects of the senses, which means his happiness, which is derived from the interaction between the objects of the senses and the senses, is no more coming from the objects of senses because he has conquered his senses. What are these senses? The mind is the biggest seat of all the other senses, which are eyes and nose and tongue and skin and all of the senses that we have. So, all of these senses, people are running behind the sense objects. Sometimes these are tangible sense objects. For example, it can be wealth that can be perceived, seen, touched, felt, which can buy a big house, big cars, big facilities, material technology. And such people are baffled by the enamoring, sparkling energy of Krishna known as Maya Devi, which is the Vaya uh, Shakti of Krishna. It's not Antarang Shakti, it's not internal potency, it's external potency of Krishna. I was just reading a news. There's this e-commerce company who is giving 500,000 pound, half a million pound to its CEO for the e-commerce business. And another director of the company is getting some 300,000 pounds. And it is in the news. Now, these are two people who are getting this, but it must be impacting millions of people who would then desire to get there in the shoes of that CEO or that business director and get that money. But what will they do with that money? Do they know what kind of life these CEOs or directors are living? All they think that having more money is directly proportional to having more happiness. Less do they realize that having more money will entangle them further into hundreds and thousands of desires, network of desires from which they can never come out. Because the philosophy of Gita is telling us that the desires will remain insatiable. They will not be satisfied. The more you have, the more you will get attached. The less you have, the less you will be attached. It's like a lot of iron together. The force of attraction of magnet will be very high. And if less iron, then force of attraction will be less also. So we see that the greed develops from the greed. Once you feed the greed is also fed again. It's a cyclical process. So I have today, let's say 100 pounds, I can live a detached life. But that 100 pounds grows into 100,000 pounds. Then you are worried about those 100,000 pounds. You make you make arrangements to secure, invest, ensure that it's protected. And then the attachment with that 100,000 pound is equally strong. God forbid, if that 100,000 pound becomes 1 million pound, you don't know what to do with life. You want to buy this mansion. And once you have that mansion, you attach to the mansion. Now you have all the miseries that goes along with the mansion, maintenance of the mansion, and so on and so forth. There's no end to these desires. There's no end to these material miseries. There's no end to the miseries which are coming from the contact of the senses with the sense objects. People innocently believe the other way around because material world is the opposite, diagrammatically opposite of the spiritual world. All the illusions of the material world fools a living entity into believing it to be real, believing it to be permanent, although it is transitional, it is transient. Thinks that this is real. However, of course, it is real experience, but it's very temporary, and it comes by the experience of the senses. This reality is unraveled here. And Krishna is saying there is a taste that exists which is higher taste. And those who experience this higher taste, they do not want to experience the taste of this matter, the dead matter. Matter. What is this dead matter? These buildings that I possess, the cars that I possess, the technology that I possess, the clothes that I possess, the lifestyle that I possess, it's all dead. There's nothing living. There's no spiritual being in any of that. The spiritual being is a spiritual being who can only be happy when the soul is happy. But the soul is not happy by the happiness of the senses. And that is what Krishna is saying here. But developing the higher taste, one can seize the engagements of the senses. In this particular verse, which is very famous, Srila Prabhupada has always quoted, Vishya vinirvantante nirarasya dehinaha rasavarjamarasvapyasya param dashtva nivartate. Param drashta, far superior things. Param, one who experiences far superior things. Then he does not want to experience these inferior taste. So it says, though the embodied soul may be restricted from sense enjoyment, the taste for sense object remains. So if one understands, okay, there is something higher, let me now give up the sense objects and let me try to restrict myself. Krishna is saying still the taste of the sense object will remain. But seizing such engagements, experiencing a higher taste is fixed in consciousness. Now, what is required? You don't need the taste of dead matter, possessing the dead matter, possessing the land, possessing the house, possessing the yeah, status. This is all dead. That will not give happiness. So, how do you know that there is something else which is better than this dead matter? How do you get that extra, the higher taste? By, by performing the activity which is called as yoga. This is what was mentioned. It is mentioned that one who performs gets the higher taste of Krishna consciousness, of understanding that soul is part and parcel of the Supreme, and it's only that in relationship to that Supreme, one can be very happy and satisfied, then one starts to get a higher taste. I would like to read this from a lecture on Bhagavad Gita that Srila Prabhupada has given in 1968, 24th August in Montreal. Srila Prabhupada has quoted this verse, Param Distva Nivartate. If you force one to stop, it is very difficult. Therefore, so many yogis have failed. And Srila Prabhupada picked up his favorite example of Vishwamrita Muni. And Vishwamrita Muni, he performed austerities for thousands of years, but when he get the opportunity, one opportunity to gratify his senses, he immediately gave into Manika, and because of that, there was a child born with the name Sakuntala. Although a great yogi who was trying to control his senses, but he failed. Then Srila Prabhupada picks up the example of Thakur Haridas, that how Haridas Thakur was tried to be dissuaded, persuaded by this prostitute, and then induced by this prostitute, who was Haridas Thakur was so young, so energetic, and he was in his prime of youth. Yet he continued chanting the holy names of the Lord. And by doing so, in one night or 2 nights, this particular prostitute also became devotee of the Lord by the purity of Haridas Thakur's chanting. So this way, Srila Prabhupada is saying that devotional service or bhakti is the means to achieve that higher taste. So, but how do you achieve that higher taste? In one of these conversations, another conversation, which is a room conversation in Mauritius in 1975, Srila Prabhupada is talking about this process. He's saying, So there is this Mr. Siavana is saying to Krishna, to Sri Prabhupada, mind has to want that higher taste. And Prabhupada said, yes, Cheto Darpan Marjanam Bhav Mahadavagni Nirvaparam. Yes, then they can accept Prabhupada. So this process bring, invite them, chant Hare Krishna, dance, give them prasadam. Everyone will take part in this way, not immediately instructing that you are not this body, your soul. He will not be able to. Srila Prabhupada is saying here that don't just people will accept the philosophy straight away. It is too difficult. Then Prabhupada goes on explaining. Therefore, this process is recommended. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu argued with Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya and Prakashananda Saraswati, but not with ordinary public. Ordinary public go on chanting Hare Krishna and dancing. Never argued. Neither he discussed Srimad Bhagavatam. For ordinary public, 4 hours kirtan, chanting, dancing, bas, and then give them sufficient prashadam. Take prashad. This is the process. Because unless he has got little shraddha, he will simply put some false argument, waste your time. Not in the beginning. Mad bhakteshu avidhashyati. First of all, create him a devotee, cultivate a devotion in him a little. Chant Hare Krishna, Hare Nam, Hare Nam, Hare Nam Kevalam. Only because this is Kali Yuga, people are so fallen, so downtrodden, so rascal, cats and dogs. It is very difficult. But this process of chanting of Hare Krishna Maha Mantra give them chance to hear it, take prasadam, that will cure. And that is easily accepted by anyone. It doesn't matter what he is, anyone will accept. To chant and dance and take prasadam, no one disagree. So this is the process. When they come to the temple, just like these boys, you're offering obeisances, they're also offering. But that will go to their credit to become bhakta. This policy should be adopted, not in the beginning, but in the beginning, give them prasadam, chant Hare Krishna, try to sell some book. You pay something, that means he's giving some service, hard earned money. That will also go to his credit. And then when he will concern that I have paid for it, let me see what this nonsense is written. All right, read. And that will also convince him. This is the way. He will keep his body, book, and show some friend. So this infection will go on. Infection of Krishna consciousness, Prabhupada is saying. It will go on. So Srila Prabhupada has time to time also ridiculed the efforts of the yogis who are trying to ultimately gain some sort of material perfection. Ultimately, this material perfection that the mystic siddhis one will get after performing the yogic exercises, which is nothing but the 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 fulfillment of material desires in a subtle way. That is also not something to be appreciated. Uh, Therefore, Srila Prabhupada has said that those people uh, who are attracted by the result of the yogic practice, then that yoga is bogus, because that yoga will not take anybody anywhere. Ultimately, it will end up giving something which is very temporary. So, underlying principle is that one who looks within and sees happiness within and does activity in connection to his relationship with the Lord, Supreme Lord. And if that is the only vision, that one is able to experience that joy, the higher taste, and with the help of that higher taste, one is able to give up the inferior taste of the matter. And once that is achieved, there is no looking back. because one is not licking the honey from outside of the bottle, one is licking the honey, the actual taste of the honey, the sweetness. Therefore, Srila Prabhupada says that one who is a devotee, once he sees the beauty of Krishna, then no other beauty of this world will attract him. That is what exactly Srila Prabhupada said in one of the purports. So this is um, verse number 24 of Bhagavad Gita, chapter 5. Today happens to be the disappearance day of the Gurudev of Srila Bhakti, of Srila Prabhupada, Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur. And I have pulled up a beautiful a lecture that Srila Prabhupada has given in the early days of ISKCON, which was 1968 in Los Angeles. And he is beautifully describing some pastimes of Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur. I thought I'll take this opportunity to speak few words about Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur. Uh, yeah. So he said, Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Maharaj was son of a very big government officer with the name Bhakti Vinod Thakur. We all know Bhakti Vinod Thakur. He's the Acharya of our Parampara, Gurudev of Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Maharaj, father of Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Maharaj. He was magistrate, government officer. In those days, magistrate is a big officer. One time there was a Rath Yatra festival and the car was passing, which means the Rath of Jagannath was passing in front of Bhakti Vinod Thakur's house. And Bhakti Vinod Thakur, Thakur's name at that time was Kedarnath Datta. Because he was a magistrate, then there was an opportunity for his mother to be able to go very close to the cart. And in this way, she was immediately given the way to go on top of the car and place the child on the lotus feet of Lord Jagannath. And there were many garlands. One garland fell upon him, Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati's blessings. So this is one of the incidents Srila Prabhupada always told. And then another story which is very famous about Bhakti Siddhanta is that when he was a child, 2 to 3 year old, he ate one mango fruit, which was kept for offering of the deity. So his father mildly rebuked him. Oh, you have done very wrong thing. It was meant for the deity. You have taken it. You shouldn't have done it. So then thereafter, whenever Bhaktisiddhanta was offered mango, he said, no, I am offender. I cannot take mango. He was thinking like that. Never in his life he took a mango. I offended my child in my childhood. I offended by taking mango of the deity, so I'll not eat mangoes. This is the characteristic of Acharya. They teach by their life's action, and one should be so much determined that one should not be. A child took the mango, there was no offense. No, but he took that vow. Then at other instance, he's telling that one time Srila Prabhupada and his godbrother, Dr. Aud Bihari Kapoor, and um, his young wife of Aud Bihari Kapoor, they were all with Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Maharaj. And the girl proposed, my dear spiritual master, I want to speak with you in private or secretly. Srila Guru Maharaj said, yes, you can talk whatever you like. But when she said, I want to speak to you secretly, Bhaktisiddhanta said, no, whatever you want to talk, you can talk in presence of all my disciples. Prabhupada mentions even that girl was just like his granddaughter by age calculation. He refused to talk with a young woman in a secret place. Prabhupada is very proudly mentioning this, that Bhaktisiddhanta was Akhanda Brahmachari. He was the fifth son of Bhaktivinoda Thakur. He never married, and from the childhood, he stayed as a strict brahmachari. And 1896, Bhaktivinoda Thakur wanted to introduce Krishna conscious movement by signing his book to Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, uh, his life and precepts, to the West. Unfortunately, that year happens to be the birth year of Srila Prabhupada. So Prabhupada mentions that in 9 December 1938, he was in 68, he was mentioning about 38. Guru Maharaj was indisposed and he was staying at Jagannath Puri on the seashore. I wrote him a letter. So Srila Prabhupada wrote Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Maharaj a letter. My dear master, your other disciples, brahmachari, sannyasi, they are rendering you direct service, and I am a householder. I cannot live with you. I cannot serve you nicely. I do not know how can I serve you. So Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur wrote a letter back in which he stated, right, on 13 December 1936, my dear such and such, I'm very glad to receive your letter. I think you should try to push our movement in English. That was his writing. And that will do good to you and to the people who will help you. That was his instruction. And in 1936, 31st December, that means just after writing this letter, a fortnight before his departure, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati passed away. Now, this is very, very notable that I'm going to read now and very relevant to all of us. Srila Prabhupada says, but I took that order of my spiritual master very seriously, but I do not think that I'll have to do such and such thing. I was at the time a householder, but this is the arrangement of Krishna. If we strictly try to serve the spiritual master, his order, then Krishna will give all the facilities. That is the secret. Although there was no possibility, I never thought, but I took it a little seriously by studying commentary by Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur on Bhagavad Gita, and so on. So we see, we can relate this to the verse that we have read today. One whose happiness is within, who's active and rejoice within, and whose aim is inward, is actually the perfect mystic. The next tab, which I'm not going to now because of the time restriction, and that Srila Prabhupada specifies, somebody asks him, how one know that Krishna is pleased? And Srila Prabhupada says, yes, if your spiritual master is pleased, then Krishna is pleased. And we see how Srila Prabhupada went chasing the directive of his spiritual master up to the end of his life. He was at the fag end of life at the age of 70, trying to achieve what Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur Maharaj wanted him to do, to preach or to spread the message of Lord Krishna of Bhagavad Gita in English language to the Western world. And just by doing that, Srila Prabhupada experienced happiness from within. He didn't have to depend upon these external objects of the senses. The life, the force, the motivation, the entire energy, the Shakti that he was getting to do the devotional service or to follow the directives of his spiritual master was coming from within. And that is why he's mentioning here that the ultimate goal is actually to please the spiritual master. By doing so, Krishna will be pleased and one will be happy within. And that way, one can easily leave the dependency on the objects of the senses and the senses themselves. I can't see that, but we all know the verse, we have a Satmika Buddhi verse, in which we understand that if we can please the spiritual master with focused one attention, intelligence, undivided intelligence, then we can please the spiritual master. And that is one very, very practical formula for all of us to be able to please, to be able to control our senses. So with that, I'd like to invite any questions or any comments that we have in the forum. I'll stop sharing this. Yeah. Hare Krishna. Okay, if there's any question, it can come in the chat also. Yes. Okay. There's a comment from Dharmesh Kunwarji. It was a very enjoyable session, my first time. Thank you, Dharmesh Kunwarji, for taking your time and coming here in the session. And sorry if I started wherever the verse was. I'm glad that you enjoyed it. If there's any question or comment, you can please come forward. Okay, there seems to be no question coming up or comment. So,
Hare Krishna Prabhuji.
Hare
Sorry,
Krishna.
Hare Krishna, my humble obeisances to you. Just a very general question, like when we send our children to school, every parent wants their child to be educated, and it's all about, in school there is competition. If you don't keep up with the pace, then obviously you're not going to get a good job. If you don't get a good job, you'll not get a good life, and so on. So it's so material world is teaching so fiercely to be fiercely competitive, and if you don't keep up with the pace, you will lose out. So that's the philosophy behind all this education system nowadays. So how will you, reconcile that with today's class that you said that we don't? So I was just thinking, how will you say to the common people who don't know Krishna consciousness?
So, Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, Mataji, that in mode of passion, whatever we'll do, mode of passion means that I want to work very, very hard and I want to achieve some results. And why I want to do it? Because I'm attached to the result. Now, in our case, what is the result that we want? That we may desire that our children should become some sort of lawyers or doctors or reputed officers in a reputable companies, and they get materially respected for the education that they have earned with a lot of hard work. And perhaps this is the same story that we have lived in our lives, chasing our dreams and aspirations in the mode of passion. Now, mode of passion would mean that when we work really hard with a desire to enjoy the result of that work, ultimately, we may initially feel that we are enjoying. Ultimately, there will two things that will happen. One, when we reach to that stage, we will we will want to achieve more, because mode of passion is something that will not leave you satisfied, because it's only mode of goodness that leaves you satisfied. Mode of passion does not leave you satisfied. So that's one part. And second part is that it will also cultivate in you a desire to achieve more. So one is not satisfied, and two, that one has to even work even harder now to maintain what he has and to achieve more. And then this cycle goes on and on. Material education, unfortunately, is based on the principles of mode of passion. And this mode of passion in this day and age, that's the education. At some point in time, it was based on Vedic principles, where one would be then cultivate the education in mode of goodness. And those education were directed to achieve the self-realization. But now the achievement that I want is to how to become a billionaire or a millionaire as soon as possible. And if it is a lottery, let it be that. If it means an e-com company wherein I get a lot of investments, I get the name and fame, and so it be that. So, and therefore there's a fierce competition, because mode of passion means I must have it for my enjoyment, which also means that nobody else should have it. I should have it. And I should have it. Not only that I should have it very fast. So this whole fierce competition is coming from that mentality. Now, how to combat it? The first principle is that if one's consciousness, mentality, thinking rises above mode of passion to mode of goodness, that's where he can experience self-satisfaction. He doesn't have to be hankering for the result, and he would not be attached to the result. Initially, the mode of goodness looks very, very difficult, and later on, it becomes very sweet. Initially, it's like poison, but later on, it becomes very, very sweet. And how do you cultivate mode of goodness? Mode of goodness can be cultivated by devotional activities and services. Hence, by logical conclusion is that how do we raise our children in a very devotional atmosphere so that even when they go out, the mode of passion attacks them. But because they will be situated in mode of goodness, mode of passion will not be able to harm them as much. Otherwise, right now, not only they, but also we, everybody's running in the direction governed by mode of passion. Therefore, Srila Prabhupada says, if you read, I think, chapter 3rd, where Arjuna is asking, Krishna, even though I don't want, even though living entity doesn't want, still they're forced to work uh, in a sinful way, in a way that is not desirable. So Krishna says this verse, Kameshu Krodeshu Rajogun Samadbhava Mahashana Mahapapma Vidyena Mihaverinam. It's calm, it's more of passion that is developed, that develops lust, Kameshu Krodesh. With more of passion, lust develops. What is lust? Lust is insatiable. Insatiable. Ravan, he was lusty. So even though he saw death personified, he just give up. He couldn't just give up his desire to enjoy Mother Sita. So this lust is just not about enjoying the opposite sex, but it's about enjoying the fruits of the activities that I want to perform. When these activities are performed as a sacrifice for Lord Krishna or for Lord Vishnu, then they are yagna. Otherwise, it's lust. So, therefore, by the sword of the knowledge, as Krishna has given to Arjuna and said, by this sword, now you defeat these three enemies, Kama, Krodha, and Lobha. Only these three enemies, if you can defeat, then you'll be situated in the transcendence. Similarly, we have to apply these principles of Bhagavad Gita in our lives and see how we can be situated in mode of goodness so that we don't get dragged by these insatiable desires which are sitting in our heart like witches and ruling our mind like ghosts and making us and our progeny, our children, our next generations work very, very hard. And now, however impractical it may appear, but this is the only way practically we can apply. If one becomes very successful, comes to certain kind of abilities, just like Arjun did, then one need to give the results of the fruits. But who is able to give the results of the fruits to Krishna? Because one gets very attached. So the best practice is if we can just perform devotional service along with devotees, and even our children do that, we'll be situated in mode of goodness and will not be governed by these undesirable anarthas or the unwanted desires in the heart. That's the only way that we know from Bhagavad Gita now. I hope I've answered your question, Mataji.
Yes, Prabhu, very nicely. Very nicely. Thank you so much. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. Thank you for what you've explained now. And that makes me think look at the state of politics, look at what Johnson is going through. And if only they were brought up in Krishna consciousness, then this wouldn't be, we wouldn't see this dog life that we are viewing in political arena. Even children of age 16 probably have more sense than people who are leading the country.
True. So blind is following the blind. This is what Srila Prabhupada said about the political leadership of the modern age. And this is what we exactly see is happening. Leaders are the one who teach by example, and they live the values and principles themselves, and have a very clear intelligence, and they're able to not just lead the country, but every living entity into that kingdom or the country into the lotus feet of the God, and lead their way to the kingdom of God. And if that is Srila Prabhupada's mentioning in all his Bhagavatam books and Bhagavad Gita books, this is the true way of behaving for a leader. And therefore we see that how these leaderships are completely failing, because a blind is leading the blind. That is what is happening. Thank you. There's a question in the chat box. Pranam, his teacher, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Maharaj, I think you mean, why did he focus on the West? Okay, now Bhaktisiddhanta, because one time Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, which was his father, when he was in Mayapur, he saw the Bhavishyavani, or the prophecy of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu coming true. Lord Krishna, who appeared as Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he predicted that the holy names of Lord Krishna will be sung in every town and village of the entire world. Now, at that time, there was not much commutation, and people could have thought that this entire world is just India, or maybe just Bengal. But that wasn't the case. It was the whole entire world. When Bhaktivinoda Thakur saw these foreign devotees, in his vision, he saw in Mayapur, which is the birthplace of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he saw the thousands and thousands of Western devotees are coming and dancing on the melodies of Hare Krishna Mahamantra. He could see that how this movement would be spread all over the world. And then his son, who is Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, who is Gurudev of Srila Prabhupada, he therefore wanted this particular message of Bhagavad Gita to go to the West. And he instructed to many, but Srila Prabhupada took it very seriously. And every time when he interacted with Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Maharaj, Srila Prabhupada received this one instruction from his Guru Maharaj, that go to the West and preach in English language. And this was the last letter that I just read. Bhaktisiddhanta had written to Prabhupada, to Srila Prabhupada, that go and preach in the West in English language. And therefore, on the command of his master, he came to the West, and we know the story of that, and how he achieved unprecedented success in spreading the holy names of the Lord. Okay, then there's a question, and being the present, is it wrong to desire what we don't have in the present for survival? Also, what is internal happiness? I keep hearing, but what is it? Okay. So these are desires. There's nothing wrong or right, but there is something pure and impure. When there is pure desire, one is very satisfied. When there is impure desire, that desire will not be satisfied, and one will continue to work to satisfy the desire. From one desire, there will be another network of desires, and from that further network of desires, which will never be satisfied. It's not a question of need or no need. It's a question of attachment to those needs and hankering for those needs. One may have something, one may not have something. But if one has the attitude of no attachment, then if he has, he doesn't have, he will not feel good or bad about it. If he has it, it's good. is facilitating him. If he doesn't have it, it's not that his life is now ruined. So what is this pure and impure desire? Impure desire is the desire to satisfy our own senses, and pure desire is the desire to satisfy the senses of Lord Hari. And this is how Shastra described it. Now, originally, the soul has this always this pure desire in the spiritual world, because in serving is the love, and in that love resides the shelter and exchange of relationships in the spiritual world. Once the living entity leaves that shelter and want to enjoy separately from Krishna through his own enjoyment, he comes in contact with material nature and develops these impure desires, which is satisfying my own senses. Now, knowing that he's not the senses, knowing that he's the soul, he cannot perhaps satisfy his senses life after life after life, living so many millions of species of life. So, if one says, is there anything wrong in satisfying my senses? No, nothing is wrong. It's just that you will not come out of the cycle of life and death. And just that in 8.4 million species, you'll go on going on, and you will never be able to reach to the end of it. And you'll sometimes go to demoniac species, sometimes go to the animal species, sometimes you'll come to the human life. And still you will miss the point of going back to where you have come from. And therefore, what is prudence? Prudence is therefore saying that save yourself. Save yourself when this knowledge has come to you so that you can go where you belong to. And therefore, um, having having association or devotees will develop pure desires, and then those pure desires will be satisfied in a transcendental manner. In that way, one can um, one can one can then get self-realization and realization of the supreme. So that is the difference between uh, trying to uh, fulfill the desires uh, or in this world or the material platform. Now, what is internal happiness? Somebody has eaten food, he feels satisfied. Nobody now need to tell him how it feels like when you have eaten food. Similarly, when one gets higher enjoyment, enjoyment in reciprocation to the Lord, enjoyment in relationship with the Lord and his devotees, one gets that happiness within, which he will say and feel that is is a happiness which is beyond this material world, beyond the senses. And that time one can, in many devotees in Krishna consciousness movement, they felt such transcendental joy that they have left so many things automatically. And that is what is called as internal happiness here, which is not dependent upon the external senses, which is coming from within, from the source itself, from the soul and the super soul. And that is what it is. One may not be able to define it, but one can surely experience it. Just like I cannot define the cakes, the pineapple, nicely baked pineapple cakes taste. Oh, it was so delicious. Oh, it was so nice. But one who has eaten it, they can just tell themselves, oh, it was something different. So it's like that. Internal happiness is something different. And and the symptom of that is that one does not hanker for the future, and neither one laments for the past. Brahmabhuta prasannatma na sochati na kankshati. So one can recognize from the symptoms what kind of happiness one is experiencing. Okay, and then there's a further chat. It says, okay, thanks. These teachers are Prabhupada's seniors. Thank you for the explanation. What about the amalgamation of Vedic culture with the West or infiltration of Western values into the culture? I tried internal happiness by searching within myself, but not happening. Anyway, thanks so much for an answer. Okay. So what Vaishnav Acharyas has given us, that if we try to follow the regulative principles, which is no meat eating, no illicit sex, no gambling, and no addictions of drugs, etc., and simultaneously we chant Hare Krishna Maha Mantra, which is the holy names of the Lord, which is non-different from the Lord, then we will definitely experience some internal happiness. And this is left to experimentation. one can do it and see whether it makes sense or not. It has made sense for hundreds and thousands now. It will certainly make sense for everybody who is sincere seeker. He will definitely experience the internal joy, as per Bhagavad Gita and as per the teachings of our acharyas. Then there was a question about amalgamation. Sorry, I'm not able to get to the question now. Yeah. What about the amalgamation of Vedic culture with the West or infiltration of Western values into the culture? So there's a culture and there is a principle. They are two different things. Vedic culture is nothing but a true knowledge of the self, of the supreme, and the goal of life and how to achieve it. Now, you can achieve that. For example, we can have different circumstances. Milk can boil in a hot temperature. If I keep ice under the boiler and there's no fire, we'll not get the milk to boil, and we'll see the milk is still cold. We may have to put so much more fire because there is ice also. Similarly, Vedic culture is conducive for cultivating spiritual life, whereas non-Vedic culture, I will not definitely say it as a Western culture. It's either Vedic, it's non-Vedic. So if there's non-Vedic culture, that will not be very conducive to cultivate spiritual life. There is no varna, there is no ashrams. We'll talk about this in detail sometime else, Mataji. Time is going up. So, but this is the essence of our understanding that non-Vedic culture is not conducive, and Vedic culture is conducive to cultivate spiritual life. Just like a dry grass, if you put fire to it, it will burn. Wet grass, you keep putting fire, nothing will happen. Similarly, these cultures are promoting combustion of a spiritual life. Vedic culture is promoting the combustion and non-Vedic culture is not. And that's a big difference. Okay, thank you very much for patiently hearing and being present for that long. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. Thank you, Prabhuji.
Thank you,
Hare Krishna. Thank you, Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna. Thank you, Prabhuji.
Thank you.
Hare Krishna. Thank you so much.
Hare
Hare Krishna.
Krishna.